couple more things here. Shared some really cool tips for how to get the most out of AI, how to build on AI, how to build great products on AI. One tip you shared is give your team as many tokens as they want, just like let them experiment. You also shared just advice generally of just build towards the model, where the model is going, not to where it is today. What other advice do you have for folks that are trying to build AI products?
I'd probably share a few more things. So one is don't try to box the model in. I think a lot of people's instinct when they build on the model is they try to make it behave a very particular way. Like, this is a component of a bigger system. I think some examples of this are people layering like very strict workflows on the model, for example, to say like, you must do step 1, then step 2, then step 3, and you have this like very fancy orchestrator doing that. Actually, almost always you get better results if you just give the model tools, you give it a goal, and you let it figure it out. I think a year ago, you actually needed a lot of the scaffolding, but nowadays you don't really need it. I don't know what to call this principle, but it's like, like ask not what the model can do for you. Maybe it's something like this. Just think about how do you give the model the tools to do things? Don't try to over curate it. Don't try to put it into a box. Don't try to give it a bunch of context up front. Give it a tool so that it can get the context it needs. You're just going to get better results. The second one is maybe actually like a even more general version of this principle is just the bitter lesson. And actually for the Claude Code team, we have hopefully listeners have read this, but Rich Sutton had this blog post maybe 10 years ago called The Bitter Lesson. And it's actually a really simple idea. His idea was that the more general model will always outperform the more specific model. And I think for him, he was talking about like self-driving cars and other domains like this. But actually, there's just so many corollaries to the bitter lesson. And for me, the biggest one is just always bet on the more general model. And, over the long term, like don't try to use tiny models for stuff. Don't try to like fine tune. Don't try to do any of this. There's like some applications, there's some reasons to do this, but almost always try to bet on the more general model if you can, if you have that flexibility. And so these workflows are essentially a way that, it's not a general model. It's putting the scaffolding around it. And in general, what we see is maybe scaffolding can improve performance maybe 10, 20%, something like this. But often these gains just get wiped out with the next model. So it's almost better to just wait for the next one. I think maybe this is a final principle and something that Claude Code, I think, got right in hindsight. In the very beginning, we bet on building for the model 6 months from now, not for the model of today. The very early versions of the product, I just wrote so little of my code because I didn't trust it. It was like Sonnet 3.5, then it was like 3.6 or 3.5 new, whatever name we gave it. These models just weren't very good at coding yet. They were getting there, but it was still pretty early. So back then, the model did, you used Git for me. It automated some things, but it really wasn't doing a huge amount of my coding. So the bet with Claude Code was at some point the model gets good enough that it can just write a lot of the code. This is a thing that we first started seeing with Opus 4 and Sonnet 4. And Opus 4 was our first kind of ASL3 class model that we released back in May. And we just saw this inflection because everyone started to use Claude Code for the first time. And that was kind of when our growth really went exponential. And like I said, it stayed there. I think this is advice that I actually give to a lot of folks, especially people building startups. It's going to be uncomfortable because your product market fit won't be very good for the first 6 months. But if you build for the model 6 months out, when that model comes out, you're just going to hit the ground running and the product is going to click and start to work.
When you say build for the model 6 months out, what is it that you think people can assume will happen? Is it just generally it will get better at things? Is it just like, okay, it's like almost good enough and that's a sign that it'll probably get better at that thing? Is there any advice there?
I think that's a good way to do it. Like, obviously within an AI lab, we get to see the specific ways that it gets better. So it's a little unfair, but we try to talk about that. So, like one of the ways that it's going to get better is it's going to get better and better at using tools and using computers. This is a bet that I would make. Another one is it's going to get better and better for running for long periods of time. This is a place, like there's all sorts of studies about this, but if you just trace the trajectory or, maybe even like from my own experience, when I used Sonnet 3.5 back, a year ago, it could run for maybe 15 or 30 seconds before it started going off the rails, and you just really had to hold its hand through any kind of complicated task. But nowadays with Opus 4.6, on average, it'll run maybe 10, 30, 20, 30 minutes unattended, and I'll just like start another Claude and have it do something else. And, like I said, I always have a bunch of Claudes running. And they can also run for hours or even days at a time. I think there are some examples where they ran for many weeks. So I think over time, this is going to become more and more normal, where the models are running for a very, very long period of time, and you don't have to sit there and babysit them anymore.
So we just talked about tips for building AI product. Any tips for someone just using Claude Code, say for the first time, or just someone already using Claude Code that wants to get better? What are like a couple pro tips that you could share?
I will give a caveat, which is there's no one right way to use Claude Code. So I can share some tips, but honestly, this is a dev tool. Developers are all different. Developers have different preferences. They have different environments. So there's just so many ways to use these tools. There's no one right way. You sort of have to find your own path. Luckily, you can ask Claude Code It's able to make recommendations. It can edit your settings. It kind of knows about itself, so it can help. It can help with that. A few tips that generally I find pretty useful. So number one is just use the most capable model. Currently, that's Opus 4.6. I have maximum effort enabled always. The thing that happens is sometimes people try to use a less expensive model like Sonnet or something like that. Because it's less intelligent, it actually takes more tokens in the end to do the same task. And so it's actually not obvious that it's cheaper if you use a less expensive model. Often it's actually cheaper and less token intensive if you use the most capable model because it can just do the same thing much faster with less correction, less hand holding and so on. So that's the first tip, is just use the best model. The second one is use plan mode. I start almost all of my tasks in plan mode, maybe like 80%. And plan mode is actually really simple. All it is we inject one sentence into the model's prompt to say, please don't write any code yet. Like there's actually like nothing fancy going on. It's just the simplest thing. And so for people that are in the terminal, it's just shift tab twice and that gets you into plan mode. For people in the desktop app, there's a little button. On web, there's a little button. It's coming pretty soon to mobile also. And we just launched it for the Slack integration too. So plan mode is the second one. And essentially the model would just go back and forth with you. Once the plan looks good, then you let the model execute. I auto accept edits after that, because if the plan looks good, it's just going to one-shot it. It'll get it right the first time, almost every time, the Opus 4.6. Then maybe the third tip is just play around with different interfaces. I think a lot of people, when they think about Claude Code, they think about a terminal. And, of course, we support every terminal. We support like Mac, Windows, like whatever terminal you might use, it works perfectly. We actually support a lot of other form factors too. Like, we have like iOS and Android apps. We have a desktop app. There's, the Slack integration. There's all sorts of things that we support. I would just like play around with these. And again, it's like every engineer is different. Everyone that's building is different. Just find the thing that feels right to you and use that. You don't have to use a terminal. It's the same Claude agent running everywhere.
Amazing. Okay, just a couple more questions to round things out. What's your take on Codex? How do you feel about that product? How do you feel about where they're going? Just kind of competing in this very competitive space in coding agents.
Yeah, I actually haven't really used it. I think I did use it maybe when it came out. It looked a lot like Claude Code to me, so that was kind of flattering. I think it's actually good, to have more competition because people should get to choose, and hopefully it forces all of us to like do an even better job. Honestly, for our team though, we're just focused on solving the problems that users have. So for us, we don't spend a lot of time looking at competing products. We don't really try the other products. You want to be aware of them. You want to know they exist. But for me, I love talking to users. I love making the product better. I love just acting on feedback. So it's really just about building a good product.